So you mentioned something there that was interesting to me because I'm a manufacturing engineer. That's what I went to school for. Like I learned how to do
Hmm.
time studies and all that good fun stuff, right? And
Yep.
when we were learning it, they were always like, you got to be real careful about how people feel because if they see you out there with a clipboard or anyone's tracking your time, it creates this whole weird dynamic. And
Yeah.
as the current generation is retiring and the next generation is coming in, how do you see employees embracing this type of data analytics IoT component?
Yeah. It's what's interesting about it is that a lot of these metrics that we as a company talk about and make products for are not novel per se. Like for example, you've been a manufacturing engineer and like something like cycle time or OEE has existed probably since the early 80s. And so they're not necessarily novel concepts. Um, there's definitely a culture shift needed when you introduce more automation, just like any robot or data collection system. But ultimately, any reasonable person knows that by measuring a system, you can diagnose what's not working and improve that. And ultimately, everyone wants a more profitable company. And so, there's going to be some education needed on why and why these tools are being introduced. But I'm pretty bullish on people adopting it, especially as the need for being competitive comes about.
That makes sense. I guess I should say too, I see more people come to that, as I go out and visit customers. That's the one big thing they're looking at, right? Is how do I take the investment I've already made and make it more efficient without the answer being just go spend another, four or $500,000 on equipment that'll be outdated in 2 years anyway. So I'm with you on
Right.
that. I'm just curious. I was always curious because the shops I ran, it took a certain amount of coaching to get my guys okay with me tracking them. Not from we're using it to fire you. We're using it to help make your life easier. I was just curious if you guys were seeing that on your side. It sounds like it's pretty similar in that regard.
Yeah.
So,
So
go
yeah.
ahead. Go ahead.
No, and I was just saying, like, there's some interesting trends around, workforce retiring, as you mentioned, and also around, trade wars and economic expansion potentially slowing down. That kind of brings down the ability to buy a lot of capital equipment. And so, kind of just riding on what you said, having the ability to make your existing assets more efficient is going to only be more of a need in the next couple of years.
So when you my one of my big arguments I've always had, and I think John and I have talked about it before in the podcast, is for companies to see double-digit improvements in performance today, right? You really need to look at performance or process and workflow and control. And it sounds like the analytics that you're talking about fit into that because I can buy the same CNC machine that anybody else can buy on the planet. I can buy the same tools. I can buy the same holders. I can mimic their feeds and speeds without any issue. But what really makes you better as a company and allows you for that extra little bit that others don't have is understanding how you're using that equipment. It sounds like what you're talking about sort of aligns with that same thought process.
Yep, exactly.
So how are you gathering this data? Because it sounds great, but what methods do you guys do to actually capture it?
Yeah, so you pointed out earlier that collecting data from CNC machines has existed in a way for a long time. And at the same time, we never really have seen this interest. And when you walk into your typical machine shop, it's unlikely that all the machines are networked producing a ton of data. And the reason behind that is that these CNC machines have different PLCs, which are programmable logic controllers. And they're made by a variety of brands, right, from Fanuc to Haas to like the machine OEMs. And unfortunately, they don't have a simple API that you can just call on. Some of them might be 20 years old, communicating in a different protocol, whereas a machine you buy this year might have MT Connect, which is a communication protocol built in. This poses a challenge of collecting information from different sources. And so we really wanted to simplify it and democratize the ability to collect data from the shop floor. And so we have a patent pending invention where we measure the electrical signatures of machines. So as parts are made, our sensors collect these patterns of electrical draw. And just from that, we're able to infer what's happening in the machine as parts are made. So it's a really simple and elegant way to capture this information, which avoids any need for integration with the PLC. Does that sort of make sense?
Yeah, I sort of follow it, because I know like on some machines you can monitor machine load, right? Which is the amount of draw you're actually pulling on a motor. So I can understand it from a high level. It sounds too good to be true. But it would simplify that, because you are correct. Like my old Matsura is very different than John's machine in his shop, as far as, controller logic, all that stuff. But it sounds really cool, and it sounds like it would solve a lot of problems.
Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate that, a lot of folks today need to deal with like pen and paper reports, collected on a piece of paper around when the machines are running and why they were down, and have to transcribe that. So, our goal is to save a lot of hassle around collecting that basic information.
So Akshat, tell me, what type of things can you assume or can you measure with an electrical draw?
Yeah, that's a great question. So obviously the electrical consumption, that's a pretty basic one. But beyond that, we're able to capture things like true machine state, as in when your machines are running and actually producing parts, when are the machines in idle, meaning they turn on but not really producing anything, and when they turned off. Now it sounds pretty simple. You can tell when a machine is running and when it's not, but just understanding utilization and real-time, what's happening on the shop floor from electricity in itself can be powerful. For example, sending out text message alerts when machines go down, scheduling out maintenance based on actual usage hours. So there's lots of applications just from this. And to take it a step further, as parts are made, they produce electrical patterns that repeat themselves over time. And we have signal processing algorithms that can look at cycle time and part counts, again, based on repeating patterns.
So a lot of the proprietary creativity in what you're providing is really that ability to make assumptions and to analyze the patterns.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct?
Yeah, correct. And we're looking at different applications around, motor wear and tear, and as tools get dull with more represented in electricity. So we're looking at some of those bleeding edge applications, but our bread and butter is around basic metrics about the shop floor.
Gotcha. So those basic metrics would really be when the machine is idle or when it's actually making or cutting metal. Is that right?
Yeah, and like how many parts are made and what's the cycle time. So those are like sort of the core OEE metrics.
Okay, very good.
Yeah, and it's not trivial bringing these kinds of things to the shop floor, because in terms of culture, a lot of places are used to operating in a certain way, and so a lot of our time is spent in clarifying, things like IoT and Industry 4.0. I mean, obviously it's great to have the tailwind of people being intrigued by these terms, but ultimately to bring value, you really have to go past the BS and really get down to specifics of what can you do with this information.
Okay.
So are most of these initiatives driven from the top down? It sounds like it would be. Within
you definitely need top level buy-in, because it's a culture change. It's getting people to change the habits, which can only stem from the top, I would say, when you're trying to change the minds of like 50 people.
Yeah, because it sounds like the output of this is to make better business decisions for a company. It's just gathering the information from the employees. So the top level or the people making the business decisions would really have to want this investment to happen so they can make the better decision. It's not one of those deals where, the engineer comes in and he's like, oh, I went to this seminar and I saw this really cool thing. It'd be great for us to pick on all the manufacturing guys and know how fast they make parts. That doesn't seem like that's probably how it happens.
No, and the truth is that, any manufacturer is just slammed with more than they can handle. So, it definitely needs to come up as solving a problem and not just testing out IoT.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, this is one of those things where you're actually going to do something with the data. It's not oh, look, we were at 2% last month, we're at 1% this month, that's great. And, if someone comes in, I can give it to her and talk about we have 1% scrap. Like, these types of analytics are so I can do something better.
Precisely. Yep.
So when you start talking reporting and real time, how often do you find that, companies look at it? Do they look at it real time, or do they look at it like once a week or every 8-hour shift? Like, how do you see people actually really using it? Because I hear lots of people use the word real time, but real time is one of those things where, is it practical to have truly real time?
I mean, like any system, at its core, our system also has latencies based on different metrics. So nothing really is, I think there's a scientific definition of what is real time, and I think it's like in the milliseconds. So most applications are not, but the real question comes down to like, what is useful? Because, you can, obviously, who doesn't want more real-time data, but the question is, how are people going to use it? And to give you a sense, here's 1 or 2 examples of how people consume this information. So getting a text message when a machine's gone down for, let's say, 10 minutes or 15 minutes, that's a really powerful application because it helps reduce response time. Again, it's not real time in that sense because you're waiting for the machine to remain down for 10 minutes, but that's an application that is time sensitive. And the other is looking at more macroscopically, which is, let's look at the month and understand what were the areas of bottleneck, as in which machines had the most downtime and why, so that we can focus on the 80-20 that's driving downtime and fix those issues. Does that sort of somewhat answer your question around latencies and how people ingest the data?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. For me, like, it always made sense that you have to have a metric that works for your company. But I hear lots of marketing buzz, and sometimes I wonder how much buzz it is versus how much the reality is.
Yep, for sure.
Because, there's also, I guess one of the questions I have too, on top of that. So when you're talking analytics, you're pulling the information, but are you talking about sending data to the machine as well? So like if I had G-code, that kind of stuff, or is it just a pull of analytics?
It's just a pull of analytics. We've been pretty specific with like the area of getting visibility, and that in itself is a pretty gigantic problem. And so just remaining focused on that one thing for now. And also, if I remember this right, like a lot of these analytics protocols, like MT Connect and all, don't allow for machine control. I think there's definitely a lot of threat in terms of cybersecurity that you want to be mindful of.
That makes sense. And I shouldn't say I shouldn't say just analytics. Analytics is a big portion. Sending a G-code file to a machine is pretty simple. But it's amazing how many people that we've talked to, when you hear analytics, they assume it is push and pull.
Interesting. Yeah, I can see that.
And I think it's just because it's a new realm, right? So it's exciting, and people, they think about Terminator and all the movies with the sci-fi, and I can sit at home in my underwear and program my CNC machine, and it'll just do what I need to do.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's the funny thing when you look at a lot of these larger corporations talking about IoT adoption. It often comes with these really advanced graphics of holograms and whatnot. But I think there is a lot of substance when you remove all that marketing, if you will. And but ultimately, my question as we develop our product is, how is the person going to make a better decision on the shop floor? And that is a good true north for us as a company, because we're a startup. We really need to be very clear about how we provide a useful product today. And so we've been really diligent about investigating who's going to make a decision, how is this information going to result in a decision, and so on.
That makes sense. I mean, manufacturing, it's an interesting thing because manufacturing has been around for a long time, right? There's no surprise in that.